For more, we can speak to Paul Smith, head of modern languages at the University of Nottingham and an associate professor in French and Francophone studies. Hello to you, Paul. First of all, a lot to get into, but I want to begin with, what was your reaction to Lecornu's being reappointed as French Prime Minister?
A sense of a little bit of surprise. There was some talk yesterday among some commentators of the veteran Jean-Louis Borloo coming back, but I suppose that it was kind of 50-50. I was kind of thinking Lecornu might be persuaded, have his arm twisted by Macron into accepting reappointment. It kind of sort of made sense, I think.
Yeah, and that's what it does appear like. Moments ago, he gave his first public comment since being reappointed. One of the reporters asked him, "Why did you take this job?" And he said something to the effect of, "No one else wanted that." Is that really how far this political crisis has gone?
Yes, I think it has. I mean, I think the problem facing Macron, facing everybody, is that nobody really wants it. I mean, it is a poisoned chalice. Lecornu has already spent one weekend and several weeks before that trying to pull together the various political parties. It seems to be that there is very little will or very little goodwill in terms of trying to form a coalition. It's not something that French political parties are used to doing in their defense, but they could make rather more concessions. So he's kind of back to the drawing board, particularly with the withdrawal or the exclusion, whichever way you want to look at it, of people like Retailleau, but also, I suppose, Gérald Darmanin, who has presidential ambitions, and even Gabriel Attal. So there are a number of figures who Lecornu would not be able to call upon, but I don't think that's such a bad thing. And to go back to Olivia's point about new faces, perhaps that might be something that he's mulling over this weekend, but he's not got very much time to sort it.
Yeah, and the first time he was prime minister, I'm going back several weeks if we can remember that far back, he said he wouldn't do 49.3, 49.3, that's the controversial measure to push reforms through the parliament without a legislative vote. So this time, I'll probably have to make more concessions. And moments ago, when he was asked about suspending the pension reform, he said all debates were possible if they're realistic. Does the French government, will it consider going back on that pension reform then?
Well, there are reports of yesterday's meeting with Macron, where Macron talked about the idea of suspending certain aspects of the bill already in an attempt to bring the left on board. It didn't seem that those concessions were quite enough. The problem is that, at one point it was 49.3 that we were negotiating over, and then the socialists were talking about the Zuckman tax, and then now we're talking about the possibility of either suspending the pensions law or changing the law as it's going to apply to people who are just coming up for retirement, who were born in 1963, 1964, and so forth. So the problem is that the issues seem to be kind of fluid and moving. But if Lecornu is serious about, and again, the version of events that's coming out of the Elysee yesterday is he's been given carte blanche to negotiate. If he is serious about the idea of everything is possible, let's debate it in Parliament, let's put it in the budget, or let's talk seriously about this, then there may be the possibility of compromise, but it really depends on whether the parties will take him up on those offers. And of course, it might be the shape of the government that determines that. It may well be that the way to bring the socialists on board, to bring les Républicains on board, most of them want to be on board, not Retailleau, is to give them certain ministries. So that is kind of that's the carrot, I suppose, that you can offer.
Yeah, and when we talk about carte blanche for Lecornu, is it really carte blanche, or is that just a way of saying you have no leverage, try to make a deal?
Yeah, well, I think it is to some extent. I mean, I think that we're almost getting into the territory of admitting that the next, 18 months until the presidential election will be a period of caretaker government. And this idea that, France needs a budget for 2026. Okay, so we get a budget through, and then we've got a budget in place for 2026. Some legislation will take place that might involve, or we might talk about suspending certain aspects of the pensions bill, but then we get into a situation where you're not really governing, you're managing. And that will have an impact, and it might well be that a little bit further down the line, because we're already talking, of course, about motions of no confidence in the government, that either before the budget or later we get a motion of no confidence that might pass. So it's a very fluid and this might solve the situation now, but it's still going to be very unpredictable, very messy.
Right. And given that uncertainty, that has some people speculating about whether Emmanuel Macron could invoke Article 16 of the French Constitution. I don't know how well brushed up you are on the French Constitution, but that would essentially bring
very well.
Well, we'll explain it to our viewers what Article 16 is and if it would really be applicable here.
Well, Article 16 would be extreme. I mean, Article 16 is emergency measures. And Article 16 would mean that, Article 16 says that the president can, if they judge that it is necessary to safeguard French security and the French Constitution, they can invoke Article 16. But they can only do that with the approval of the Constitutional Council. That's the first step. I'm not sure that they would necessarily approve that. But let's imagine that they do. You can't dismiss Parliament at that point, and you can't dissolve the National Assembly. That's very clear under Article 16. So, although some people might be talking about that seems very unlikely to me that there would be a serious. Who knows? Tomorrow morning he might decide that he's invoking Article 16, and I'll look like an idiot. But he would have to have the approval of the Constitutional Council, and it wouldn't actually resolve the problem of the National Assembly that he's got at the moment, because, as I say, both houses of Parliament would have the right to sit during the period of emergency rule, and it says very clearly under Article 16, you cannot dissolve the National Assembly. So that would kind of fix things. I suppose the argument might be that there's another way of doing that. It's basically saying I can't dissolve the National Assembly, so we can't have fresh elections. I think that would be very unwise. It's only been used once, and that was by de Gaulle at the time of the Algerian War. So that would be a very extreme measure.
Yeah, very different circumstances. After Lecornu appeared on national television to give an interview after he had resigned this week, his popularity surged. Now he's back at Matignon. Will there be a honeymoon period, or do you think he'll come under fire right away?
I think, he might get a very brief honeymoon period. I think a lot of people actually feel quite sorry for him. Certainly amongst my in-laws, the sentiment was that, insofar as I've had time to talk to them, certainly the feeling was, well, what a job. It's always been the prime ministerial post has always been described as the worst job in France, because historically the president got the glory if things went well, you got the blame if they went badly. Paradoxically, that's kind of flipped round over the last few years, but I think there will be a certain amount of sympathy, particularly because the political parties don't seem to really want to play ball. Retailleau, for example, throwing his toys out of the pram last Sunday, I don't think that went over actually terribly well with Conservative voters who see Les Républicains as being the natural party of government. So, we want to be involved in government. We don't want to lose that kind of control. He might have a short honeymoon period, but I don't think it would last very long.
And one more question for you, Paul. France is second biggest economy in the Eurozone, a key member of the EU. Political instability in France, what does that mean for the broader region?
Well, it's not good news. Certainly, the German press this week has been expressing, the view that we really need France to be stable. We need a government for things to move forward. And of course, that's right across the piece. The idea that some people were mulling over of Emmanuel Macron resigning, which is very unlikely. You suddenly think, what would happen about the situation in Ukraine, the position with Europe to regard that. So with regard to that, although a lot of people are kind of saying ha ha at the French, the Italians, for example, apparently the Italian press have been loving it, because for years, of course, the Italians were mocked by the French. But actually, it's really important that the French get beyond this, that we get some stability back. France gets a budget, it tackles its deficit problem, and we're able to move on. And that's what's really complicating the issue as well, that this is, this has local in the sense of national French, but also beyond that, really serious consequences.
In the U.S., there was some discussion that Barack Obama paved the way for Donald Trump to come to power. Here in France now, concerns that if Emmanuel Macron's government were to call elections, the far right would win. And Emmanuel Macron perhaps not wanting that to be part of his legacy. Other people saying, perhaps call those elections now, get a far right prime minister in, see if it works out. And if it doesn't work out, that might avoid a national far right win in the presidential election in 2027. Do you think Macron is making any of these calculations, or is he considering something else?
I think he's certainly thinking of all of those things. I mean, one of the big questions is: would Le Pen and Bardella want the opportunity to govern for a year? Let's imagine that they win the general election. A period of cohabitation has to happen. Okay. Would they want to do that? There have been occasions in the past where they've done well in regional elections, for example, and then you kind of thought, well, I'm not sure that she really wants to be the president of a region in a year leading up to the presidential election, because there's also this kind of idea of the curse of being prime minister, that being prime minister stops you from actually getting to be elected president. So there's those calculations will be being done on her part, but also, as you say, on Macron's part. The playbook is absolutely full, I think, of options. The problem is that sometimes Macron chooses the wrong play. He did in June 2024. I think that there is a very big, and the socialists as well. It's not just a question of the Macronist supporters. I think, for example, the socialists would not want, and Les Républicains would not want, a general election at this point in time, unless, of course, Les Républicains, is quite interesting, there's a by-election going on down in the Tarn-et-Garonne, in Montauban, tomorrow, where there's a kind of test going on about the relationship between the far right and the right-wing candidate who's dropped out. You've got the far right against the socialists, and how right-wing voters, their candidate is no longer able to stand, how they're going to vote. And it's kind of being seen as a litmus test of the possibility of what the French call union des droites. And the union des droites, literally the union of the plural right, would be a union of Les Républicains and former Républicains who now support Le Pen, and Le Pen. And can that work? So there's a lot of potential, avenues that one could explore at the moment in French politics.
Indeed. Professor, thank you very much. Paul Smith joining us from Nottingham. Thank you.